You're listening to Rekt Radio, the source for thoughtful interviews with technology leaders, blockchain engineers, and social media trendsetters making an impact in new media. Now, here's Rob.
Hey guys, you picked a good one because in this episode I've interviewed Chris Blec, who's the best regarded decentralized finance watchdog out there. In a small industry, he has 25,000 people that follow him on Twitter and that check out his video content, and essentially he's tweeting all the time for the benefit of the community to check out vulnerability, possible exploits, to report on exploits as they happen in real time. For this most recent Thor chain exploit, he was the one to break the story of any prominence. And his commentary on the issue is really incisive for someone that's been in the space for a while. So I would encourage you to follow him. And I thought that his answers to this question in regards to the story that I wrote on my LinkedIn newsletter was particularly thoughtful and well built out. And I thought that it would resonate really well with you, the listening audience that is interested in a lot of cybersecurity issues and the structure and technical architecture of blockchain projects. So I thought, even though it's an asynchronous interview, I thought that you'd get a lot to hear his answers. And without further ado, here's the first question that I have for Chris Blec, which is, what is the danger in allowing whales through the proof of stake / bond type of approaching to securing the blockchain to control the process, the voting processes, and revving up and turning down the nodes of a blockchain? So all that really is asking is that with whales, so people that are large owners of a project, being able to control a proof of stake blockchain, which essentially you get more power the more you have. What's the danger there in being able to turn the blockchain on and off, which is what happened with Thor chain through their, I guess, agreed upon security measures. And Chris has a great answer for this and all questions.
Like if you're talking about Ethereum proof of stake, for instance, the biggest danger there is that, proof of stake basically equates to money, greed, wealth, running the validation network, the validation of blocks. So validation of blocks is happening based on a consensus vote from the biggest validators. And the biggest validators are the wealthiest, the biggest, the richest, the corporations, the ones with the most invested in the protocol. Their incentive might not always match up with what's best for the chain. So for instance, if one day in the future Goldman Sachs Bank becomes a huge validator on Ethereum, the question becomes, is their incentive always going to be stronger to protect the network than it is to attack it? We don't know the answer to that. We hope and we assume that it would always be in their best interest to protect the network, to not get slashed, to protect their own interests on the network. But these huge corporations that are most likely to become the biggest stakers, the biggest validators, they have a lot of other corporate interests outside of the Ethereum network. So, again, we don't know what the future holds. We don't know how big of a world Goldman Sachs is going to be living in when it becomes a validator on Ethereum. And of course, it's hard for people to imagine like Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or even the US government becoming we don't know. Like 5 years from now, the US government could be the biggest validator on Ethereum. What do we do then? We know that the US government is not fully incentivized to protect the Ethereum network at all times, but we've left ourselves open to that kind of problem by moving to proof of stake.
So speaking on a large-scale ecosystem basis, do you think projects that strive to achieve true decentralization and fork to deal with the exploits, a la Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, which is essentially what they did when they disagreed on a particular exploit? Or must every DeFi project have some circuit breaker or of some sort behind a multi-sig or multiple signature wallet? That's where someone controls the actual wallet contents by having a lot of the parties agree to the same action. Community of nodes or DAO-based community-centric solution to stabilize periods of instability. So it's essentially, do you need a safeguard for these types of things, or do you think, can you put enough trust in a decentralized project to figure it out absent these types of situations that could be manipulated and exploited?
So this depends on the goal of the project and the complexity of the project. I do believe that any project that launches in a centralized fashion with a multi-sig or with a tight-knit community of nodes is going to have a much harder time fully decentralizing than a project that launches fully decentralized, fully trustless. So we have yet to see a project that didn't launch trustlessly become fully trustless. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the most important one is that trustlessness and decentralization are much messier, much slower, much less profitable than centralization. So once a project starts in a centralized state, for them to give up profit, give up speed, give up efficiency, give up all that stuff that comes with centralization, it gets very, very difficult, especially when they have investors that they owe a return on their investment to. So I'm much more in favor of projects launching trustlessly, without multi-sigs, without DAOs, without nodes, if they can, and then upgrading users to new versions when needed. A lot of projects, though, are just way too complex to do that. So when you look at something like Thorchain, due to the complexity of their project, they probably can never reach a point of full trustlessness where they don't have the nodes, just because of how complex their system is. I could be wrong about that, but based on what I know, I don't think they could ever become Uniswap level trustless. So it really depends on their goal, but again, I always lean towards projects that launch trustlessly and aim to stay trustless and stay decentralized over their lifetime, and then migrate users from one version to the next when they want to make upgrades and make improvements.
So we all know that decentralized finance on Ethereum is where it's at. It's the de facto home for every large DeFi project. Do you see the DeFi being built on Bitcoin as potentially impactful as the DeFi that's currently being built on Ethereum at the present time?
It certainly could be. And here's the reason why. Because Ethereum, the one thing that's unique about DeFi on Ethereum is that it can be built directly on Ethereum, on the base layer. And it can be built trustlessly on the base layer. But DeFi on Ethereum has not embraced that idea. And most DeFi on Ethereum has not been trustless. It's really relied on permissionlessness as its unique selling proposition. And it's abandoned the idea of trustlessness for the most part. The problem is when you rely just on permissionlessness, it becomes very easy for other chains to replicate that without your strong base layer validation. That's why Binance Smart Chain, Polygon, and others have been able to compete, because they don't need a trustless mechanism to compete, because they're really just competing on what Ethereum DeFi has prioritized, which is permissionlessness. When it comes to Bitcoin, it absolutely can compete. Once a layer 2 is built that gains adoption, like TBD, which is being built by Jack Dorsey and others, that has real potential to become just another layer 2, just like Polygon, but on top of Bitcoin. So why not, right? If you can have that layer 2, if you can send your Bitcoin across a bridge to get there, if you can have stable coins and you can have other coins on this layer 2 that's programmable, just like Ethereum, why wouldn't it compete? I don't see a reason why it wouldn't. It might even overtake DeFi on Ethereum if it can gain enough adoption. And again, Ethereum, if it wants to win this battle, it would need to focus on trustlessness on the base layer, which Bitcoin cannot do easily with DeFi. Bitcoin can have trustless Bitcoin, obviously, but it can't have trustless DeFi on its base layer at this time. So it has to rely on a layer 2. Ethereum is not going down that road, so I think that they're going to face a lot of competition that they otherwise might not have needed to face.
This is me editorializing a little bit, but you've shown yourself to bravely call out lead dev teams of powerful projects for their sloppy security standards and have been met with an avalanche of abuse from these same devs, bots, and proxy accounts. How important is Watchdog work by visible influencers to limit the rug pulls for those entering the ecosystem and not having a too in-depth or great a sense of what's going on?
Thank you. The main focus of my work is on transparency. And there's others out there that are really focusing in on each individual project and looking for specific things that people need to be worried about. And that's really valuable stuff too, to limit people getting into bad situations. But my focus has been on transparency and letting users get access to the information that they need to make their own risk assessment with their own brain, right? Because I think everybody's got a different risk tolerance. So if somebody wants to participate with a reckless piece of garbage, insecure DeFi project, I don't really care if they want to do that, as long as they know and they have the information they need to understand that it's reckless and insecure and crappy in general. So I think that transparency is really the number one thing. Now, obviously a scam is not going to be transparent. So a scammy project's not going to be transparent. So we still need people out there who are looking for crimes that are happening in that sense. But I do think that if every DeFi project, if they were responsible and they provided transparency, or users expect and got it from reputable projects, and then maybe from projects that are less reputable, they didn't get it, at least when they're not getting the transparency, they know they're not getting the transparency, and they can take that into consideration when they're trying to assess the risk. But either way, I think there's two categories here, and that's transparency, and then there's the actual watchdog, like crime investigation stuff that's going on with scams. I think those two things are very important going forward.
My other little editorialization is the tone by project leads getting in your face for innocently putting spotlights on blatantly visible exploits has been disquieting, in my eyes, and I think in the eyes of many, which is why you have the following that you do, and would not be tolerated by a C-level executive operating on Wall Street, even though many crypto projects have market capitalizations well in excess of even NYSE-listed companies, billions of dollars. Why do you think so many of these devs or developers fly off the handle rather than embrace the decorum that would best bode well for their project in the long run? And what, as a community, can we do to promote greater civility in addressing and fostering these discussions in your eyes?
I don't think they're behaving that much differently from a Wall Street executive. And the reason is that I'm not asking questions that they can defend against. I'm asking questions that they have no good answer to, because I want to raise the awareness of that fact with users. I want users to understand that there are questions outstanding about the security of these projects that even the developers don't have answers to. They don't have good solutions for. And when I ask those questions to the projects, for them to respond, they would have to admit that. But for them to admit that would, in their eyes, make them look bad to users, to investors, etc. The right way to respond would be to say, you know what, Chris, you're right. You're raising a very important issue that we don't yet have the answer to. And we would like to, over the next few months or years even, work towards a resolution on that. For now, we don't have a good answer, and we acknowledge that. And this is not a perfect situation, but we'll get there eventually. But we're not even getting that. So I think a lot of it is immaturity and just fear of looking bad if they don't have all the answers. But again, I don't think it's that different from if you ask a Wall Street exec or a politician or anybody who is in charge of anything, a question that they don't have a good answer to, 9 times out of 10, they're just going to ignore the question. And you would hope that DeFi would be different, but it's proving itself to be the same as those other black box type of industries, unfortunately.
What do you think about the concerted effort on behalf of the community to clamp down on words like decentralized if a project is not delivering on the meaning of the word in their blockchain's technical architecture. As you know, this is a real problem that a lot of projects are guilty of, saying they're decentralized when they're anything but, and they're really far from it.
Decentralized is a vague term. It's a spectrum, and there's no absolutes. There's no absolute decentralization. There's no absolute centralization. Even Bitcoin's not 100% decentralized, but it's the best that we have. So using Bitcoin as the decentralization benchmark is a fair thing to do. But when a project uses the term decentralization and decentralized, it's a subjective term a little bit. Now, if Coinbase says they're decentralized, will we voice opposition? Yeah, because I think it's pretty clear to everybody that they're much closer to what we know as centralized in the finance space versus decentralized, which would be Bitcoin. But for a lot of projects on Ethereum, it gets into that gray area where they're somewhere in the middle. I think it's fair for people to push back if they feel like the term is being abused, but it'd be very difficult to have any kind of rule or metric or any kind of law about how the term could be used.
I look forward to the opportunity to talk to Chris more in the future to talk about future exploits, because there will be future exploits, and the constant pressure for personal liberties and safety with KYC information. Know your customer. So it's like when you send your driver's license and social security number to a lot of these exchanges, they'll furnish it to the regulators, IRS, and a lot of times it'll get lost in the shuffle. So I understand the need to get this information to be in compliance for US or Europe facing citizens. But I think the track record of companies like Facebook, even with huge valuations and teams of cybersecurity professionals, is pretty abysmal. So it might be that it's just better to have the regulations be more lax, because even these tech companies have shown themselves to be unable to really safeguard your information with the same level of stringency that you would protect your own information. You don't give out your social security number to someone on the street if they ask for it, but you will give it to a bank. And the fact that a lot of the losses of sensitive information happen just on the desktop of like Facebook employees or in really sloppy security measures goes to show that it's pretty fraught with difficulties when you're giving your personal information to essentially random people. They have a project, but if you can fog up a mirror, you can have a project. And I think people assume, especially in blockchain, that people have a tech competency when they really don't. Getting a project going, getting a coin deployed, these can be done by really anyone with any sort of blockchain development experience on Solidity, and can be done cheaply and easily. So take a critical eye to every project you look at, and watch watchdogs like Chris Blec to get a nuanced view of a project and what's going on. And your retirement portfolio, if you invest in crypto, will thank you in the long run.